The cold case unit at the Metropolitan Police Department was a place where careers went to die, or at the very least, quietly fade into obscurity. Tucked away on the forgotten third floor, far from the vibrant, pulsating energy of active investigations. It was a realm of dim lighting, stale air, and towering stacks of ancient case files. Dust motes danced in the anemic glow of overhead fluorescence, disturbed only by the occasional rustle of yellowed paper or the creak of an old chair. Here. Time stretched and blurred, and the ghosts of unsolved mysteries seemed to whisper from every overflowing cabinet. In this quiet, overlooked purgatory resided Elias Vance, a detective whose prime was widely considered to be decades behind him, a grizzled figure relegated to the shadows. To the younger, eager officers who occasionally ventured up to retrieve a tangential piece of history, Elias appeared slow, almost glacial in his movements. His routine was methodical, almost obsessive. He would select a file, a thick, bound volume of police reports, witness statements, and faded photographs, and painstakingly pore over every detail. His fingers, gnarled with age and scarred by decades of a very different kind of contact, would trace lines of faded ink. His eyes, though often appearing weary, missing nothing. He rarely spoke, his silence often mistaken for disinterest or the mental fog of an aging mind. But beneath that quiet exterior, Elias was a connoisseur of forgotten details, a meticulous archaeologist of the past, sifting through the detritus of unsolved crimes with a patience that transcended modern policing. Lunchtime was a solitary affair for Elias. While the main precinct hummed with the vibrant energy of active investigations, detectives barking orders into phones, the excited chatter of breakthroughs, the clatter of keyboards, Elias remained isolated in his cluttered corner of the cold case unit. He would eat a cold, often bland sandwich from a brown paper bag, the crust curling slightly, his gaze fixed on the grim faces in the black and white crime scene photos that adorned his desk. These weren't just images. They were the echoes of lives brutally cut short, stories unfinished, and the silent, pressing weight of injustice. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, but his mind was always on the cases, turning them over, examining them from every conceivable angle, searching for the one overlooked detail, the one misplaced thread that could unravel the decades-old knot. Amidst the stacks of files, in a rarely disturbed corner of his desk drawer, lay an antique, non-standard issue revolver. It was a relic from a bygone era of law enforcement, its blued steel worn smooth from years of handling, its wooden grips polished to a dark sheen. Elias would sometimes pull it out, not to threaten or intimidate, but to clean it. His movements were precise, almost meditative, as he meticulously disassembled the intricate mechanism, cleaning each component with a soft cloth, then reassembling it with the fluid grace of long practice. The metallic scent of gun oil mingled with the dust of old paper, a strange yet comforting combination that spoke of vigilance and enduring purpose. It was a ritual, a quiet communion with an instrument that had once been an extension of his will, a symbol of the justice he still tirelessly pursued. One sweltering afternoon, the quiet rhythm of the cold case unit was abruptly shattered by a loud crash and a string of panicked exclamations from the neighboring cubicle. Liam, a young, idealistic rookie detective, barely a year out of the academy, stood over a desk, his face a mask of horror. He had accidentally knocked over his oversized coffee mug, sending a dark, steaming cascade directly onto a crucial, decades-old cold case file. The liquid seeped rapidly into the brittle, yellowed pages, threatening to destroy delicate evidence, forensic reports, witness sketches, and painstakingly preserved notes. Panic flared on Liam's face. "Oh no, oh my God. The Blackwood case, I've ruined it." Other, slightly older detectives from the unit looked up, their expressions a mix of dismay and resignation. The Blackwood case was one of the oldest and most stubborn, a murder from the 1970s that had stumped generations of investigators. To damage its file was almost sacrilege. Elias, who had been engrossed in a particularly grim autopsy report, looked up, his movements unhurried, almost imperceptible. Without a single word, he calmly rose from his desk. He didn't rush, didn't shout. Instead, with an uncanny swiftness that belied his age, he moved to Liam's side. His hand, quick and precise, darted out, gently but firmly diverting the flow of coffee with a strategically placed folder, preventing the bulk of the spill from reaching the core of the file. Then, from a small, discreet kit he always kept in his top drawer, a kit filled with specialized forensic wipes, blotting papers, and archival-grade absorbents, he expertly retrieved a sheet. With practiced hands, he began to blot the fragile, stained documents, absorbing the liquid with a surprising efficiency, salvaging the delicate evidence from certain destruction. He managed to save most of the pages, though a faint, telltale coffee stain lingered at the edges. He offered a quiet, reassuring nod to the mortified rookie, whose face was still a mosaic of terror and gratitude. "Careful, detective," Elias murmured, his voice low and steady. "Every piece of paper, every detail, tells a story, and sometimes the oldest stories are the ones that matter most." He then returned to his desk, leaving a bewildered but profoundly grateful Liam in his wake. No one else seemed to notice the quiet efficiency, the almost invisible intervention. To them, Elias was just the old detective, pottering about with his dusty files. As Elias settled back into his chair, reaching for another file, a small, faded scar, oddly shaped like a specific, stylized bird, a peregrine falcon in flight, was briefly visible on the underside of his left wrist, just above his hand. It was a subtle mark, easily missed, quickly hidden again by the sleeve of his worn jacket as he moved. He occasionally muttered obscure procedural terms under his breath, terms that belonged to a bygone era of police work, from a time when intuition and meticulous observation were valued as highly as DNA evidence. "Geometric analysis of the approach vector," he might whisper, as he examined a diagram of a crime scene, a phrase that would baffle any modern rookie. He also had an almost preternatural ability to correct subtle logical flaws he observed in crime documentaries playing on a small, muted TV in the break room, casually muttering, "The perp would never use a south exit. Too exposed." Actions no one noticed or attributed to him. He possessed an uncanny memory for minute details of historical crimes, often citing exact dates, obscure facts, and the exact names of forgotten victims from decades past, as if he had lived through every investigation. These were the quiet whispers of a hidden past, fragments of a mind still sharp, still profoundly connected to the echoes in the files. The calm before the storm was merely the silence before a familiar, chilling melody would begin to play. The Metropolitan Police Department buzzed with a new, restless energy, a palpable shift in the air that hummed with ambition and the cold logic of modern metrics. This change was embodied by Captain Marcus Thorne, the new captain who had arrived like a sharp, disruptive wind, young, impeccably dressed, and intensely focused on data-driven results. Thorne was a staunch proponent of lean policing, dismissing anything that smacked of traditional, intuitive detective work as outdated and inefficient. His office, unlike Elias's cluttered nook, was stark and minimalist, reflecting his no-nonsense approach. To Thorne, the cold case unit was an anachronism, a dusty relic bleeding resources that could be better spent on measurable outcomes. Captain Thorne's favored detective, Valerie Chen, mirrored his ambition with a chilling precision, sharp, ruthless, and keenly intelligent. Valerie was a rising star, eager to impress Thorne and climb the ranks. She was a master of leveraging data to support her arguments, and she viewed anyone who clung to old methods as an obstacle. Her eyes, often cold and calculating, frequently darted towards Elias's corner of the cold case unit, a silent judgment passing over his methodical pace and seemingly archaic methods. She subtly, almost imperceptibly, undermined Elias, planting seeds of doubt about his relevance whenever she had Thorne's ear. She saw him as dead weight, a relic whose impending removal would clear a path for her own ascent. The problem, the catalyst for Elias's public reckoning, began with Captain Thorne's department-wide restructuring initiative. He held a series of mandatory briefings, projecting sleek infographics onto screens, detailing the optimizations he intended to implement. The cold case unit, with its low clearance rates and reliance on what Thorne termed gut feelings and dusty hunches, was singled out as a prime example of inefficiency, a drain on valuable resources. And within that unit, Elias Vance, with his perceived slow pace and unconventional habits, became the poster child for everything Thorne sought to eradicate. "Our goal," Thorne announced in one such briefing, his voice crisp and devoid of emotion, "is to move forward, to embrace modern policing. That means shedding outdated methodologies and ensuring every officer is operating at peak efficiency." A subtle red bar on a projected graph, indicating low productivity, cold case unit, seemed to throb with accusation. He didn't name Elias directly in front of the assembled detectives, but his gaze, sharp and dismissive, frequently flickered towards Elias, who sat in the back, meticulously polishing his spectacles. The personal impact of this restructuring culminated a few days later, with a summons to Captain Thorne's office. Elias found himself sitting across from Thorne's gleaming, uncluttered desk, the captain's face a picture of impatience. Valerie Chen stood subtly to the side, her expression neutral, but her eyes held a glint of anticipated triumph. "Detective Vance," Thorne began, his voice clipped and formal, "we need to talk about your performance, or, rather, the lack thereof." He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Your clearance rates in the cold case unit are, frankly, abysmal. Your reliance on what I understand to be intuition and personal archives, rather than proper data-driven forensics, is simply not compatible with the modern direction of this department." He gestured dismissively towards Elias's worn, leather-bound notebook, visible in his breast pocket, which contained a lifetime of handwritten observations and insights. "Your methods are outdated. Detective," Thorne continued, his voice hardening. "The world has moved on. We need officers who can adapt, who can utilize the cutting-edge technology at our disposal, not those who cling to antiquated practices. Furthermore, your age, while I respect your service, the demands of active detective work require a certain dynamism." He delivered a blunt, humiliating lecture, criticizing Elias's methods, his age, and his perceived inability to keep pace with the modern force. Then came the official pronouncement, effective immediately. "Detective Vance, you are officially transferred to archival management. You will oversee the digital conversion of historical police records. Your desk in the cold case unit will be reassigned, and your access to active investigations will be restricted. Consider it a necessary realignment of resources." He effectively sidelined Elias, reducing his once respected role to a bureaucratic dead end, implying his career as a detective was over, a polite dismissal wrapped in procedural jargon. "This department needs forward thinkers. Detective, not historians." Elias felt a deep sigh escape him, a familiar weariness settling over his old bones. He felt the sting of being undervalued, cast aside like a broken tool. Decades of dedicated service, of countless sleepless nights spent chasing shadows, of honing an observational acuity that few possessed, all reduced to outdated methodology and a polite dismissal. He watched Thorne's dismissive wave, the casual contempt in his eyes, and a familiar, bitter taste rose in his mouth. However, as Thorne turned away, signaling the end of the meeting, a spark ignited within Elias. It wasn't the fiery defiance of youth, but a quiet, simmering resolve, a deep-seated pride that had long been dormant beneath layers of civilian life and bureaucratic disappointment. He remembered the faces of victims from unsolved cases, their silent pleas echoing in the archives. He remembered the promises made, not just to the department, but to himself, to the pursuit of justice, no matter how long it took. He thought of the unique observational skills he possessed, his encyclopedic memory for crime patterns, for the minute details that others missed. This was not a hobby. It was a calling, a profound understanding of the criminal mind. To let it die, to be discarded without a fight, felt like a betrayal of his very essence. The final insult arrived a few days later, a formal notice taped to his main desk in the cold case unit, informing him to clear his personal effects by the end of the week. His nameplate was already gone. This desk, once a symbol of his last active role, his connection to the living pulse of justice, was now being reassigned. It was the irreversible moment. He could not simply fade away into archival obscurity, allowing Thorne's new guard to erase his relevance. He had to choose how to respond to this blatant injustice and disrespect, this threat to his very purpose. The world might have called him washed up, but Elias Vance knew his keenest instincts, his most profound insights, were merely awaiting the right moment to resurface. The storm was brewing, and Elias, the old detective, was about to find himself in its eye. The sterile quiet of the cold case unit, where Elias now presided over a kingdom of forgotten paperwork, was a stark contrast to the sudden, jarring chaos that erupted in the main precinct. A brutal, high-profile murder had struck the city, shattering its fragile sense of peace and sending shockwaves through the police department. The victim, a prominent city councilman, had been found in his opulent downtown apartment, meticulously staged, leaving almost no forensic evidence. It was a crime designed to baffle, a chillingly precise act that spoke of a disturbed, intelligent mind. The media, always a hungry beast, went into a frenzy, demanding answers, casting a harsh, unforgiving spotlight on the homicide unit. The new homicide team, led by Captain Thorne and including his favorite detective, Valerie Chen, struggled under the immense pressure. They moved with a frantic urgency, but every lead seemed to dissolve into thin air. Crime scene technicians scoured the apartment, but found only a handful of ambiguous fibers and a faint, unidentifiable scent. Interrogations yielded nothing but dead ends and alibis. Valerie, usually so sharp and confident, found herself frustrated, her data-driven approach hitting a wall against the sheer lack of tangible evidence. She paced the bullpen, her brow furrowed in concentration, the grim faces of her colleagues reflecting her own growing despair. They were chasing ghosts, and the city was growing restless. Elias, confined to the archives, spent his days surrounded by the weight of history. His new office was a cramped, windowless space filled with rows of old filing cabinets, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten tragedies. He was ostensibly tasked with overseeing the digital conversion of historical police records, a mind-numbing task designed to keep him busy and out of the way. But even amidst the monotony, Elias's mind, a vast library of criminal pathology, remained sharp, constantly sifting, connecting, observing. He kept a small portable radio on his desk, tuned to the local news, a quiet defiance against his forced irrelevance, as a particularly sensational news report about the councilman's murder played softly on his radio. A small detail, fleetingly mentioned, pierced through Elias's usual impassive demeanor. The reporter described a peculiar aspect of the crime scene, a single, meticulously placed, antique silver coin found on the victim's pillow. It was dismissed by the reporter as an unusual flourish, a strange, almost artistic signature left by the killer. But to Elias, it was more than just a detail. It was a signature. Not just any signature, but one he had seen before. A visceral reaction seized Elias. The mundane act of cataloging files ceased. His hand, which had been reaching for a stamp, froze in midair. A tremor, barely perceptible, ran through his old bones. His eyes, usually heavy-lidded, snapped open, suddenly sharp, piercing, almost preternatural in their intensity. He saw it, not just in his mind's eye, but as a chillingly vivid echo from a past long buried, the exact same detail, the single antique silver coin, found on the pillow of a victim from a 30-year-old unsolved serial killer case. The Shadow Weaver murders. He had studied that case file for years, every minute detail etched into his photographic memory. A case that had haunted his early career in the city for decades. No one else had ever made the connection. It was too obscure, too easily dismissed as a mere quirk. But Elias remembered. He remembered the specific weight of the coin, the faint engraving, the way it had been placed, as if in a macabre offering. He quietly, almost unconsciously, drew a connection that no one else in the entire department, with all their modern technology and young ambitious minds, could possibly make. Unbeknownst to Elias, he wasn't entirely alone in the archives. Liam, the rookie detective, still deeply grateful for Elias's quiet assistance during the coffee spill incident, occasionally visited Elias in the archives. He saw Elias not as washed up, but as a repository of invaluable institutional knowledge, a living library of old cases. Liam often sought unofficial advice on minor case details, or simply to escape the oppressive pressure of the main bullpen. He had entered the archives just as Elias's reaction to the news report occurred. He saw the sudden, intense focus in Elias's eyes, the subtle shift in his posture from weary archivist to something akin to a coiled spring. Liam paused, a quiet question forming in his mind. Moments later, Valerie Chen, burdened by the lack of progress on the councilman's murder, grudgingly stopped by the archives. She wasn't there for advice. She was there to mock Elias's new role, to gloat subtly in his irrelevance. She saw Elias staring intently at the radio, a strange light in his eyes. Liam, intrigued by Elias's profound reaction, gently probed him. "Detective Vance, is everything all right? You seem agitated." He watched Elias, sensing the undercurrent of something significant. Elias, hesitant and guarded, knowing the ridicule that would follow any mention of a 30-year-old cold case, deflected. Just an old memory. "Detective, nothing to concern yourself with." He tried to sound dismissive, fearing Liam would see him as senile, as clinging to the past. But Liam's curiosity was piqued. He knew Elias well enough to recognize that this was no ordinary memory. He felt a quiet conviction that Elias possessed an insight no one else did. Valerie, however, dismissed Elias's sudden focus on the current murder as delusional, a desperate grasp for relevance from a man who should have retired years ago. Still chasing ghosts. "Vance," she scoffed, a sneer on her lips. "This is a real case, with real stakes, not some dusty relic from your glory days. Leave it to the actual detectives." She later found an opportunity to subtly plant seeds of doubt about Elias's obsession with old cases and unprofessional behavior to Captain Thorne. "He's spending all his time listening to the news." "Captain," she reported, her voice laced with feigned concern. "Muttering about old cases. I think the pressure is getting to him. Perhaps he's experiencing some age-related cognitive decline." She hinted at senility or a breakdown, hoping to cement his irrelevance and prevent him from interfering with Thorne's modern, efficient investigation. Thorne, already dismissive of Elias, merely waved it off, muttering about old dogs and new tricks. But he filed it away, adding to his existing prejudice, reinforcing his belief that Elias was beyond his prime, a useless relic of a bygone era. The stage was set. Elias, armed with a terrifying, singular insight, was trapped in the archives, an unheard prophet. The killer, a ghost from the past, had returned, leaving a signature only one man could read. The dramatic irony was palpable. The solution to the city's most terrifying crisis lay with the very detective they had deemed washed up, dismissed, and forgotten. The game had begun, and Elias Vance was the only one who knew the rules, even if no one would listen. The city held its breath. A mere 2 days after the councilman's murder, a second body was discovered in a meticulously preserved historical brownstone, miles from the first crime scene, yet bearing an unsettling resemblance. The victim, a renowned art dealer, had been found with the same peculiar calling card, a single, antique silver coin placed deliberately on the pillow. This time, the killer's signature, once subtle enough to be dismissed by the uninitiated, was more pronounced, chillingly identical to the 30-year-old cold case Elias remembered with such painful clarity. Public fear escalated into a palpable wave of terror. The media frenzy intensified, their headlines screaming about a serial killer, demanding immediate answers and arrests from the police department. The police station, particularly the main homicide bullpen, became a crucible of escalating tension. Whiteboards were scrawled with theories, maps were plastered with crime scene photos, and the air crackled with a desperate urgency. This was the symbolic arena where Elias, the washed-up detective, knew he had to prove his worth. Despite being relegated to the archives, he possessed the key, the only one who could truly see the pattern, read the killer's ghost-like signature. Armed with his unique insight, Elias meticulously prepared a concise, compelling report, detailing the undeniable parallels between the current murders and the 30-year-old Shadow Weaver cold case. He included specific, obscure details only he would have remembered. The precise type of silver coin, the almost ritualistic placement, the unique, subtle patterns of entry and exit that defied conventional breaking and entering. He brought it to Captain Thorne's office, the heavy folder feeling like a desperate plea for recognition. Thorne, however, was immersed in a chaotic briefing with his homicide team, his face grim with frustration and lack of progress. When Elias patiently waited for an opening, then presented his report, Thorne merely glanced at the ancient-looking folder, then at Elias, his expression one of weary impatience. "Detective Vance," he said, his voice laced with patronizing politeness that barely concealed his irritation. "We appreciate your enthusiasm, but we are dealing with a modern serial killer, not some dusty folklore from 3 decades ago. Your theories are outdated, speculative, and quite frankly, a distraction." Valerie Chen, Thorne's favored detective, stood beside him, her arms crossed, a subtle smirk playing on her lips. She seized the opportunity. "With all due respect, Captain," she interjected, her voice sharp and dismissive. "Detective Vance's insights from the cold case unit are, at best, anecdotal. We need actionable intelligence, not conspiracy theories from forgotten files. This case demands cutting-edge forensics, not nostalgic musings." Her words, delivered with a professional polish, reinforced Thorne's prejudice and publicly undermined Elias. Thorne nodded in agreement. "Exactly, Detective Chen, Elias, stick to your archives. This is not your jurisdiction. We need to focus on what's relevant now." He publicly dismissed Elias, mocking his outdated theories and conspiracy theories from the cold case unit. The other detectives in the bullpen, overworked and stressed, offered Elias sympathetic but wary glances, too intimidated by Thorne and Valerie to openly support him. Elias realized then that he truly was alone in this. He couldn't rely on the department's official channels or the goodwill of his former colleagues. He would have to act independently, using his forgotten connections and unofficial channels, his understanding of the city's hidden pulse. The killer, Elias knew, was escalating. His pattern was becoming terrifyingly clear, suggesting a third victim within days, perhaps even hours. The pressure mounted on the police department to make an arrest, the mayor herself making public statements, demanding results. Elias had a rapidly shrinking window to prove his theory, to convince anyone who would listen, and to identify the killer before another innocent life was lost. The burden of potential victims weighed immensely on his conscience. He felt the cold dread of knowing, yet being unable to act through official means. Captain Thorne, now frantic with the lack of progress and pressured relentlessly by the mayor's office, called for a sweeping, generalized task force. He ordered every available officer to flood the streets, searching for any anomaly, any suspicious person, any lead, a broad, unfocused dragnet that Elias knew would yield nothing. Thorne completely ignored Elias's specific leads, his detailed insights into the killer's unique signature, convinced that modern, large-scale deployment was the only answer. Valerie Chen, seeing Elias as a lingering threat to Thorne's authority and her own rising star, actively sabotaged his attempts to access crucial data from the active investigation. She deliberately delayed his requests for new crime scene reports, misplaced his emails, and subtly misdirected other officers who might have been inclined to listen to Elias, planting seeds of doubt about his reliability. "Detective Vance is just struggling to let go," she'd remark casually to a younger officer. "He means well, but he's holding on to old grudges." Her actions were insidious, designed to isolate Elias completely. The stakes climbed with every passing hour. Elias not only risked his final shred of professional reputation, but felt the immense, unbearable burden of potential victims on his conscience. The Shadow Weaver case from 30 years ago wasn't just a file. It was intimately intertwined with a personal tragedy from his past, a haunting memory of a life he couldn't save. To fail now, to let this killer continue, would be to fail that memory all over again. He needed to find irrefutable proof, a missing link from the past, to connect the current killer to the cold case. But he had to do it without revealing too much of his own suppressed history, the raw wounds that still bled in the quiet of his mind. He worked tirelessly, driven by a quiet desperation, meticulously cross-referencing old victim profiles, studying forgotten city maps, searching for patterns that only his uniquely trained mind could discern. The hunt was on, and the only one truly equipped to catch the ghost was the man they had dismissed as a relic. The homicide unit bullpen was a pressure cooker, simmering with the raw nerves of overworked detectives and the acrid smell of stale coffee. Captain Thorne paced before a large whiteboard, its surface a chaotic mess of notes, diagrams, and dead ends. The mayor's office was calling every hour, and the media, a pack of hungry wolves, bayed outside the precinct doors. A third victim was imminent, and the department had nothing. Valerie Chen, her usual sharp composure fraying at the edges, presented a new theory, a desperate, generalized profile that felt flimsy even to her. The room was filled with the frantic energy of futility. Suddenly, Elias Thorne, who had quietly entered the bullpen unnoticed, stepped forward. He held a worn, leather-bound notebook in one hand, its pages filled with his meticulous script. His presence, usually dismissed, now cut through the frantic energy with an almost unnerving calm. Captain Thorne, mid-sentence, paused, his brow furrowed in irritation at the interruption. "Detective Vance, I told you to stay in archives," Thorne began, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. "We don't have time for your antiquated theories." Valerie Chen shot Elias a look of disdain, already preparing her cutting remark. Elias, however, ignored the dismissal. His gaze swept over the frantic faces, landing briefly on the detailed but ultimately meaningless diagrams on the whiteboard. "Captain," he stated, his voice low, steady, and resonant, cutting through the bullpen's chaos like a fine blade. "Your current theories are flawed. You are chasing phantoms. The killer is not a new entity. He is a ghost from the past, a wraith that has returned." A ripple of uneasy murmurs spread through the room. Thorne scoffed. "A ghost? Are you serious, detective? This is a modern case, with modern forensics." "Indeed," Elias countered, his eyes glinting with an almost preternatural understanding. "And the forensics confirm it, if you know how to read them." He then approached the large screen where crime scene photos of the current victims were displayed, with a small, remote device. He projected his own meticulously prepared slides, old, grainy photographs flickering onto the screen beside the new, high-resolution images. "Observe," Elias commanded, his voice gaining a quiet, unshakable authority. He highlighted minute details on the new crime scene photos, details that had been dismissed as accidental or insignificant, a specific type of knot used to secure a window latch, unlike any standard knot. A peculiar placement of a victim's personal object, a small, silver thimble, left precisely at the edge of a bedside table, and a unique pattern of entry and exit from the building, suggesting not forced entry, but a subtle, almost invisible bypass of security systems. Then, with a click of his remote, he showed the same details on the 30-year-old cold case photos, the identical knot, the exact same placement of a similar, seemingly innocuous object, the chillingly identical pattern of entry and exit. The similarities were undeniable, laid bare for all to see. The room fell into a stunned silence. "This is not coincidence," Elias stated, his voice resonating with grim certainty. "This is a signature, a killer's psychological calling card, honed over decades, a message. The Shadow Weaver has returned." Valerie Chen's face drained of color. She stared at the screen, her mouth slightly agape, a dawning horror in her eyes. The meticulousness she had praised in the new killer was suddenly imbued with a terrifying history. Her own data-driven analysis had completely missed the forest for the trees. "And his identity?" Thorne demanded. His voice strained, a flicker of desperate hope now mingling with his fading arrogance. "You claim to know a 30-year-old killer." Elias looked directly at Thorne, his eyes piercing. "Not merely a killer. Captain. An architect of shadows. He was never caught because he understood how to manipulate the perception of absence. His name is Arthur Finch." A collective gasp swept through the bullpen. Arthur Finch was a name from the original cold case, a seemingly unremarkable, long-forgotten suspect who had been briefly questioned and then dismissed due to a rock-solid alibi and a lack of direct evidence. He was considered a minor tangential figure, an innocent man caught in the periphery of a monstrous crime. Thorne attempted to dismiss him again, his ingrained prejudice warring with the undeniable evidence. "Finch, that's impossible. He was cleared. He had an alibi." An alibi built on manipulation and a hidden network of tunnels beneath the city. "Captain," Elias retorted, his voice unwavering. "A network known only to a select few, accessible only through forgotten maintenance points." With another click, he projected a faded, intricate map onto the screen, a detailed blueprint of the city's ancient underground utility tunnels, precisely marked with routes and hidden exits that connected directly to all the crime scenes, past and present, and crucially, to Finch's then residence. Elias had retrieved this map from the deepest, most overlooked section of the archives, a relic of antiquated city planning. Then came the bated breath moment, the final critical piece of evidence. "And this," Elias said, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper, "is the link. Captain, the silver thimble. It's not just a quirk. Arthur Finch's mother, a renowned seamstress, was the last person to own a thimble of that specific make and design in this city. A collector's item, unique to her. Finch, a meticulous craftsman, inherited it. He places it as a macabre tribute, a twisted homage to his own warped sense of artistry, a silent sign to the only person who might have truly understood his peculiar genius back then." Elias paused, his gaze sweeping over the horrified faces. "I learned that detail from Finch's original psychological profile, compiled by a brilliant but forgotten criminal psychologist in the 90s, buried deep in the Blackwood case file. A profile that also hinted at his obsessive, almost artistic need for recognition for his work, a need that only I seemed to pick up on back then." A profound, stunned silence fell over the homicide unit. The sheer audacity of the killer, the meticulousness of his long-dormant return, and the unparalleled insight of the old detective slammed into everyone with the force of a physical blow. The truth was brutal, undeniable. The transformation on the faces of the homicide unit was a study in pure catharsis. From initially skeptical, dismissive glances, their expressions shifted to shock, then disbelief, and finally, a dawning comprehension that blossomed into profound awe. Many gasped, their eyes wide, some gripping the edge of their desks. Valerie Chen, her ambition and arrogance shattered, sank into a chair, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Her catastrophic misjudgment of Elias, her blind adherence to modern metrics over seasoned intuition, had been laid bare. Captain Thorne stood utterly frozen, his arrogant dismissal replaced by profound shock and a crushing, visible shame. His face crumpled with the weight of his prejudice and his colossal error in judgment. Liam, the rookie detective, watched with tears in his eyes, a profound sense of vindication washing over him, a fierce pride in the old detective who had believed him. The revelation of Elias's unparalleled insight, his unacknowledged genius, electrified the room, the police force, which had written him off as a relic, a washed-up old man, now showered him with awe and admiration. The phones on the desks began to ring, calls coming in about Arthur Finch's current whereabouts. The hunt was on, and the man they had sidelined was the only one who could lead it. The climax was not just a victory, it was a powerful catharsis, a profound moment of societal recognition for the hidden brilliance of Elias Vance, the architect of justice. The sudden, chilling revelation of Arthur Finch's identity sent a surge of electrifying energy through the homicide unit. What had minutes before been a scene of mounting despair now thrummed with renewed purpose. Elias Vance, the quiet, discarded detective, was no longer dismissed. He was the undisputed orchestrator of justice, his words holding the weight of undeniable truth. The city, gripped by fear, held its breath, waiting for the inevitable. The apprehension of Arthur Finch was swift and decisive. Armed with Elias's precise insights into the killer's meticulous habits and obscure escape routes through the city's forgotten underground network, tactical units moved with unprecedented efficiency. Finch, a seemingly unremarkable man who had blended seamlessly into society for decades, was caught in a hidden lair beneath an old, abandoned factory, a lair that mirrored the meticulous, almost artistic precision of his crimes. His long reign of terror, dormant for 30 years but now reignited, finally came to an end. The sheer audacity of his decades-long deception, the chilling calculation of his crimes, was unveiled to a horrified public. Finch was swiftly brought to justice, facing the full force of the law for the lives he had brutally taken, his punishment proportionate to the depth of his depravity and the suffering he had inflicted. The fallout within the police department was immediate and profound. Valerie Chen, her ambition exposed as callous careerism and her judgment fatally flawed, faced a swift internal review. Her deliberate attempts to sabotage Elias, her dismissive attitude towards his insights, and her outright disrespect were brought to light by several junior officers who had witnessed her actions. Faced with irrefutable evidence of her maliciousness and professional misconduct, Valerie issued a terse, public apology to Elias, devoid of true remorse but forced by circumstance. She was quietly but firmly dismissed from the force, her once promising career extinguished before it truly began, her ambition having led to her professional ruin. Captain Marcus Thorne, deeply humbled and visibly shaken by the catastrophic error of his judgment, faced a more agonizing reckoning. The image of Elias, the man he had so casually cast aside, single-handedly cracking a case that had stumped his entire modern homicide unit, was a bitter pill to swallow. His arrogance had almost cost innocent lives and plunged the department into utter disrepute. Thorne, his face etched with genuine shame, issued a heartfelt public apology to Elias Vance, his voice strained but sincere. "Detective Vance," he began, his gaze meeting Elias's, filled with a raw sincerity the captain had never shown before. "My pride and my rigid adherence to new methodologies blinded me. I disrespected your wisdom, dismissed your experience, and in doing so, I nearly jeopardized everything. You are a detective of unparalleled insight, and I deeply regret my actions. You saved this city." Thorne, recognizing his profound misjudgment and the need for a fundamental shift in his leadership philosophy, made a difficult but honorable decision. He stepped down from his captaincy, choosing instead to focus on a new role within the Police Academy's training division. He dedicated himself to developing ethical leadership programs, emphasizing the critical importance of humility, respect for seasoned experience, and the dangers of allowing ambition to cloud judgment. He became a changed man, his stern exterior now tempered with a newfound empathy and a deep commitment to fostering a police force that valued wisdom as much as youth. For Elias, the resolution brought a profound sense of peace. He was no longer the forgotten relic. He was revered, celebrated, a living legend within the department. He politely declined offers of early retirement with full honors, knowing his purpose was far from over. Instead, he was reinstated to a position of immense authority, the head of a newly created, highly prestigious cold case and behavioral analysis unit. This was not merely a material reward or a symbolic gesture. It was an opportunity to apply his unique talents on a systemic level, to build a unit dedicated to solving complex, seemingly unsolvable cases, and to train a new generation of detectives in the nuanced art of criminal psychology and meticulous, intuitive investigation. His first and most crucial act was to appoint Liam, the idealistic rookie detective who had believed in him, as his key protege and second in command. Liam, now a full detective, radiated excitement and a profound sense of purpose, eager to learn from the master. One quiet evening, after the frenzy of Finch's capture had subsided and the new unit was slowly taking shape, Elias and Liam sat at Elias's old desk in what was now their dedicated office. The desk, once cluttered and overlooked, was now meticulously organized, a beacon of clarity amidst the neatly arranged case files. The familiar scent of old paper mingled with the fresh tang of new beginnings. Liam held a steaming mug of coffee, its aroma filling the air. "I still can't believe it, Detective Vance," Liam said, his voice hushed with awe. "All that time, you knew, and no one listened." Elias took a sip of his own cold coffee, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. "Sometimes, Liam, the truth whispers, but we're too busy listening for a shout." Finch's signature. It was a ghost of a whisper, a calling card from a past I knew intimately. He paused, his gaze drifting to a framed, faded photograph on his desk, a younger Elias, beaming, arm around a beautiful woman and a small child. The Shadow Weaver case wasn't just a file to me. The second victim in that original series, she was my wife. And my daughter, barely a toddler at the time, was gravely injured in the same attack, though she survived. Finch's signature, that silver thimble. It was found at my home, too. Liam gasped, his eyes wide with shock and profound understanding. The personal tragedy, the immense decades-long burden Elias had carried, suddenly cast a new light on his quiet obsession, his profound insight. "For 30 years, Elias continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "that case was my torment. Every new victim, every dead end, was a fresh wound. I was too close, too blinded by grief to see the full picture back then. They called me obsessive, unstable. I let the case consume me, almost cost me my daughter's sanity, and drove me away from active duty into the quiet anonymity I sought. I stepped back, tried to forget, tried to find a different path. But the signature, it always lingered. I knew he was still out there, waiting. And when he returned, when I saw that coin again, I knew my time had come. My long struggle to find peace. It could only come by finally giving justice to those he stole from me and from the world." He looked at Liam, his eyes clear and resolute. "You, detective, you listened. You saw beyond the old man and the dusty files. That is the mark of a true detective. And that," Elias concluded, a faint smile on his lips, "is why we will build something truly special here. Something that ensures no victim is ever forgotten, and no truth remains buried." The new calm that settled upon Elias's life was not merely an absence of conflict, but a profound peace, born of finally confronting his deepest pain and forging a new path for justice. 3 years later, the once dusty cold case unit was utterly transformed. It was no longer a forgotten corner of the precinct, but a beacon of innovative investigative techniques, its walls buzzing with quiet purpose. Elias Vance, far from being washed up, was now a revered and beloved figure in the police department, his name synonymous with unparalleled insight and unwavering dedication. His methodical approach, once dismissed as slowness, was now celebrated as meticulousness. His unconventional habits understood as the hallmarks of a truly singular mind. He had found a profound peace in his work, honored for his unique contributions, his past torments finally channeled into a powerful force for justice. He continued to mentor young detectives, fostering a culture of humility, meticulousness, and the deep understanding that some truths lie buried, waiting only for the right eyes to find them. The unit, under Elias's leadership, became a model for departments nationwide. They had successfully closed numerous cold cases, bringing closure to grieving families and putting away criminals who had long believed they were beyond the reach of the law. Elias ensured that every case, no matter how old or obscure, received the attention it deserved, driven by his unwavering belief that no victim should ever be forgotten. His commitment to paying it forward was profound. He knew that the blend of seasoned intuition and modern technology was the key to unlocking the most stubborn mysteries. To that end, Elias established the Vance Cold Case Fellowship, a groundbreaking program that brought together retired detectives, those with decades of on-the-ground experience and a wealth of unspoken knowledge, and aspiring forensic specialists, young, brilliant minds fluent in cutting-edge technology. The fellowship created a symbiotic relationship, allowing the intuitive wisdom of the old guard to be married with the analytical power of the new, tackling seemingly unsolvable cases as a united front. Elias personally oversaw the program, often sharing his own case files, including the Shadow Weaver case, as living textbooks for his fellows. He ensured that the lessons learned from tragedy would serve as tools for future justice, making sure no victim was ever forgotten and no signature went unread. Captain Thorne, now a respected figure in the Police Academy's Ethical Leadership Development Program, often brought his classes to the Cold Case and Behavioral Analysis Unit. He would stand before them, pointing to Elias, the quiet force at the unit's core, and speak with profound sincerity about the dangers of arrogance, the value of experience, and the true meaning of leadership. Valerie Chen's name was never mentioned, a silent testament to the fate of unchecked ambition. Liam, now a seasoned detective and Elias's indispensable second-in-command, ran the daily operations of the unit, seamlessly blending modern techniques with Elias's timeless wisdom. Their partnership was a powerful example of how mutual respect and shared purpose could achieve the impossible. The story culminates on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in the newly expanded Cold Case unit. The office was bright, organized, and remarkably functional. Elias, no longer in a generic uniform, but in a slightly worn but distinguished suit, stood before a cleared wall. The grim, old case photos that had once hung there, a constant reminder of unsolved anguish, were now replaced by something else, something that spoke of closure and remembrance. On the wall hung a single, framed, composite sketch. It was the face of a cold case victim, meticulously detailed and almost lifelike, rendered not by a police artist, but by Elias himself, using his uncanny memory and forensic insight to give a face to the long-forgotten. This victim, a young woman from the very first Shadow Weaver case, had finally been given justice. Her story completed, her humanity restored. Elias looked at the sketch, a profound sense of peace settling over him. It wasn't about fame or accolades. It was about honoring the unseen, the forgotten, the voiceless. As he turned, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket, a small, subtle tattoo of the stylized bird, the peregrine falcon in flight, was visible on his left wrist. It was no longer hidden, but openly displayed, a permanent mark of his past, a symbol of his unwavering pursuit. It was a silent testament to the long, unbroken thread of justice, a thread woven from personal tragedy, decades of quiet persistence, and the enduring strength of a man who refused to let the shadows win. Elias Vance, the architect of justice, had finally found his lasting peace, his legacy secured in the quiet triumphs of every solved case, every victim remembered, and every new detective inspired by the enduring power of his unbroken will. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.